Almost 2 years ago now, I had an idea for a casual 2D space game where you'd fly your little ship around a freely explorable area, booting up satellites and receiving messages from your character's friends and family back home. It was supposed to be a super tiny 10 to 20 minute game that would take me literally a few days to develop, just as an excuse to mess around with some 2D space physics. But the fact I'm making this video tells you that's not exactly how it went. Just last week I finally set up a Steam page for the game, including a short teaser trailer. There'll be a link in the description, so please give it a look and do me a favour by adding it to your wishlist. But as far as this devlog goes, it's been a very long and messy road to get the game to this point, with lots of mistakes along the way. So how about we go right back to the beginning. This is the only footage I have of the very first rough prototype I knocked together in September 2022, where I was testing the physics-based buttons you'd have to ram into to activate the satellites. You used left click to move, and that was about it as far as I can remember. There's also a few random objects scattered around, which I'd imagine being spawned in as little rewards for you to mess around with after each satellite you booted up. This was around 2 or 3 days in, I think, so it was just missing the mechanic for actually receiving messages when you hit the buttons. Then it'd be pretty much done, right? By just 3 or 4 weeks past my original deadline, I'd redesigned the player ship, replaced the puny little thruster flame with a dynamic smoke trail, made a few sound effects, added a basic main menu with a smooth, seamless transition into gameplay, and finally implemented the message system. There was also a simple HUD, some bigger asteroids that you could fly inside, and you could press this button on the rocket to change the colour of your ship's windows, for some reason. The basic idea hadn't actually changed much by this point, it was still just about hitting buttons on satellites and receiving messages. And to help with that, I'd added this ping mechanic, where right-clicking would show a little green arrow pointing in the direction of the nearest satellite, and then powering up a satellite would trigger a new message, with no text in it. So clearly it wasn't quite finished yet, and there are maybe already signs that I was thinking about adding more to the gameplay, with there being these gates you can fly through like a little race course. But I'm sure by next month it'll be all wrapped up. By the end of November I did indeed have a complete, fully playable demo, but things may have changed slightly along the way. The intro animation now led into a short tutorial which introduced the brand new map UI and waypoint system, which replaced the ping ability from before. Why? Well, that leads us onto the gameplay changes. This time when you hit the button on the satellite, now with its own fancy redesign, it doesn't activate straight away. There was now just one satellite in the level which needed to be calibrated by completing a few small challenges dotted around the map. The level was pretty big and I wanted players to be able to tackle the challenges in whatever order they fancied, so the map and waypoint system was my solution for that. And for the mechanics of the challenges, I tried to lean more into the physics element of the game concept with football in space, obviously. All 5 challenges were simple variations on the same idea of pushing these giant footballs through big glowing gates, like squeezing a ball inside one of the big asteroids or hitting a ball through a gate faster than a certain speed. But unfortunately the physics weren't the best, with both the player ship and the footballs being very floaty. So having every challenge use the football mechanic did tend to get a bit frustrating for my playtesters. There was also the fact that every single object in the game had physics, so you could push around the asteroids or the satellite, or you could accidentally spin around one of the goals, ruining your carefully set up shot. Back in the original game design, I had this idea that it would be this physics sandbox where you could interact with everything and nothing was fixed in place, like in space in real life. But that idea didn't quite mesh with this new challenge concept, since being able to freely move anything and everything kind of made level design a bit pointless. But while it might have been a bit of a mess of conflicting ideas, this demo was the first version of the game which had an actual ending, since once you completed the 5 challenges you could go back to the satellite and hit the button again to play this little animation and complete the demo. So it had that going for it at least. Two months later I'd put together playable demo number 2. And by this point almost every key element of the original prototype had been removed or reworked somehow, as the scope creep continued. The satellite was no longer the centerpiece of the level, having been replaced by a warp relay, which was part of the new story I was working on. The core of the level still consisted of a number of calibration challenges placed around the same physical space, but I'd shrunk that space down and been a lot more deliberate about the level design. helped by the fact that asteroids, satellites, and basically all objects were now totally static, marking the end of the physics sandbox idea. Each of the now 3 challenges in the level was based on a different mechanic, which added some much needed variety. And they also all now had time limits, so you need to fly into these little bubbles and hit a key to start the timer when you were ready. But, as you can see, there was absolutely no visual indicator of how much time you had left. You just had to listen to this incessant beeping that sped up to stress you out even more when you only had a few seconds left. And if you did end up running out of time, you'd fail the challenge and have to turn around and head all the way back to the start point to try again, which got a little bit tedious if you failed more than once or twice. Some of the challenges also had more than one objective, such as this one where you needed to activate a few of the old satellites. But there's also no visual indicator of how many you have left, other than by individually counting them on the map. This demo actually had a whole second level you unlocked after completing the 3 challenges, which had a slightly different map layout and 3 more challenges, including some new mechanics which weren't in level 1. And completing level 2 brought you once again to the demo complete screen. So overall, this version was more fun to play through than the last one, but the invisible time limits added a whole new source of frustration, and honestly the whole time limit concept in general was a bit too much of a departure from my original chill, casual vision for the game. I think my reason for adding them was to add some possibility of failure without adding hazards that I thought wouldn't fit within the wholesome spirit of the game. Not quite sure why I thought a constantly ticking time bomb would fit, though. Demo 3 wasn't full of quite so many drastic changes, which is unfortunate because I think a few more were needed. The old message system, which politely informed you that you'd received a new message which you could easily ignore, was replaced with a simple dialogue and cutscene system which steps through the text line by line and shifts the camera around to show you relevant points of interest. The first level is more of a guided tutorial this time, first taking you to a very simple challenge where you just need to fly through 4 nearby nodes with no time limit, with there now being a convenient count of remaining objectives in the bottom left of the HUD. Next, you are introduced to the Boost ability. This was an attempt to spice up the gameplay by adding more for you to do than just holding down left click all day. To use it, you held down right click to charge it up, then released after the ding to get a nice little burst of extra speed. Using the boost, you could now attempt the second challenge, which had you racing to a point in a short time limit, which now also has an on-screen clock in the bottom left corner. Why I didn't realise that was an important thing to add earlier, I have no idea, but we got there in the end. The third challenge then shows off this new mechanic for challenges with multiple objectives, where each completed objective adds some time back onto the clock, which adds to the intensity for sure, but again goes back to the point of time limits in general not really suiting the game, and this change just made them even more prominent. I'd also ditched the map's waypoint system, since this version added controller support, and it wasn't super easy to make the map makers easily selectable with a controller, so I figured they weren't that useful in the smaller levels anymore anyway, so just removed them. One-upping the previous demo, this one has a total of 3 levels, again with 3 challenges each. All the challenge types from the last demo are here as well, and with this one I tried to improve the football physics, but ended up going too far in the other direction by making them feel heavy and hard to move around. But the biggest problem with this demo is that by level 3 it starts feeling a bit samey and boring, severely lacking variety despite having quite a few different challenge types. I was still firmly against the idea of adding hazards at this point, but the lack of any more interesting, trickier to dodge obstacles than just static asteroids was probably the biggest factor in making the gameplay so unengaging. I didn't stop working on the game after that March demo, but over the next few months I completely changed the structure multiple times, reworked pretty much every system yet again, and even managed to make it even more boring at one point. I was doing pretty regular playtests, but it consistently just wasn't really working. It turns out, if it wasn't obvious already, that I didn't really know how to make the game actually fun. So rather than wade through all that mess, let's skip to the next properly playable demo, a whole 8 months later. The first big change is that challenges were now separated out into their own scenes, with the starting scene of each level being turned into a sort of hub world, with teleporters to each of the level's 4 challenges. Giving each challenge its own dedicated space meant I could choose a map layout and place obstacles specifically for that challenge, rather than trying to design levels around several challenges at once. so now each challenge feels much more different from the others in the same level. You might also notice there's no timer in the corner of the screen during these challenges. I didn't get rid of time limits entirely, but completing a challenge against the clock is now an optional extra you unlock after completing the challenge for the first time, so you can progress through the game without ever facing a time limit, or you can choose to take them on to earn extra rewards, which in this demo are simple ship skins. Another addition is the new overload system, where you can complete an optional bonus challenge in each level to unlock a new ability called an overload. The first one is an updated version of the old boost ability, which is now basically a sprint where you hold down the button to go faster, but you can't turn while boosting, and it has a limited fuel bar which replenishes over time. And the final big change is one you may have already noticed in the top left of the screen, a health bar. I'd finally managed to come up with a compromise for the hazard problem, adding these yellow electric field obstacles which pulse between two different sizes, knocking you around a bit and dealing a point of damage if you hit one. And once you get to level 2, you come across red versions which can hit you for 2 points of damage. The whole system is framed as your ship having its power cells overloaded, rather than actually taking any sort of damage, and if you lose all 3 of them, your ship just loses power and needs to reboot. And the consequences for running out of power completely aren't too bad. You just get teleported back to the spawn point of the current scene, and any challenge you're in the middle of gets reset. So you never lose more than a minute or 2 of progress, and there's no more tedious backtracking. There were a few more smaller features added as well in this demo, which was by far the biggest I've made despite only having 2 levels, but I think that covers all the important ones. This version was definitely a big step forward, which you'd hope it would be after 8 months, but it still wasn't quite there. The hub worlds especially are a bit too big and empty, and there's also way too much dialogue, which makes both levels drag a bit if you don't just skip through it. But immediately after completing that demo, I shifted focus to a new, smaller project, a game called Otto's Escape, which I recently released on Steam. As I talked about in my previous video about its release, that project was about me getting experience in actually finishing and releasing a game, as well as taking a break from the cycle of constant redesigns I was stuck in last year. But now that Otto's Escape is out and I'm back working on a little space, I've already made a few tweaks to the most recent design that have got it feeling quite a bit better. So in the next devlog I'll go over all those changes and the general direction I'm currently going in, but in the meantime please check out A Little Space on Steam and add it to your wishlist, and I will hopefully see you in that next devlog.